Good afternoon and welcome to the third in our OSEP Symposia series in 2018. And the title of this symposium is Effective Strategies to Enhance High-Quality Implementation of Individualized Education Programs, or IEPs. I am Carmen Sanchez with the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education, and I will be moderating today's event. First, a bit of information about the technology. You as a participant will be muted throughout the symposium. We invite you to submit questions in the Ask a Question box. You can find that box under Q&A tab near the bottom of your screen. We will try to address as many questions as possible during this question and answer session after we hear from our speakers. Additional questions may be addressed in the future on the collaboration spaces on the OSEP Ideas That Work website. To enhance your viewing experience, we recommend you close all other programs, including email, in your internet browsers. If you happen to lose audio or video, try either refreshing your browser, logging in through a different browser, or asking for help in the chat box. Additional tech support information can be found on the Symposia page on the Ideas That Work website. During the Symposia series, we are discussing the important role that developing and implementing high-quality IEPs plays in ensuring that each child with a disability can be successful. The three symposia are interconnected. First, in April, we laid the policy and research foundation to establish a common understanding and a set of principles for high-quality IEPs. Then in June, we explored what high-quality IEPs mean in practice, specifically discussing what teachers, leaders, and IEP teams need to develop and implement high-quality IEPs and how we can support those needs. Today, we will learn about how educational agencies, families, and other stakeholders work together to develop and implement high-quality IEPs. Before we get started with today's presentations, I want to share with everyone that you will hear from several speakers today. Some are department grantees and others are practitioners and stakeholder partners. We have designed this symposium to share valuable information that we think will assist our grantees in their varied roles in improving results for children with disabilities and their families. However, the contents of the presentations do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume enforcement by the federal government. Today's symposium will focus on effective strategies to enhance high-quality implementation of IEPs. During this presentation, you will hear from experts as they discuss how to support inclusive school principles, how to implement evidence-based and high-leverage practices, exploring online resources available to you, using daily report card as a progress monitoring and intervention tool, collaborating with specialized instructional support personnel, establishing a culture of professional learning, and lastly, we'll actually see an example from Wisconsin on developing and revising IEP guidance. Without further ado, let's get started with our first speaker, the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the United States Department of Education, Johnny Collett. In this capacity, he serves as the advisor to the Secretary of Education on matters related to the education of children and youth with disabilities, as well as employment and community living for youths and adults with disabilities. I will now turn it over to the Assistant Secretary, who has joined us for all of the symposia this year. Welcome, Johnny.
Thank you, Carmen, and thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to the third in the series, the symposium, and we're really excited that you're here. Thanks for taking time away. We've been busy here. I know you've been busy in your work and in your world, and a lot has happened since the last time that we met, and certainly that's true for us here in OSERS, in the Office of Special Education Programs and OSEP. We have recently announced a new director for OSEP, Lori Vanderplague, so I'm really excited for her to join our team here next month in November, and really excited for you to get to know her over the months and years to come. So no one knows better than states and those who serve them that we've got big problems to solve and great opportunities to seize in our mission to raise expectations and improve outcomes for each infant, toddler, child and youth with a disability in our country. We know that these changes won't happen overnight or through the commitment of only a few, but we also know that the hard work is worth it, because at the heart of all of our efforts are the individuals we serve and their futures. This should lead us then at every level to an unwavering commitment to be honest about and to address anything that stands in the way of improving outcomes for every child. The Department of Education acknowledges that states, school districts, and parents know the needs of their children and students better than we do. So that means that no one is in a better position than states and those closest to the children they serve to imagine and implement the changes needed to truly raise expectations and improve outcomes for each child with a disability. As you know, I've been asking people to join us in rethinking special education and in challenging the status quo of special education in our country. At its heart, rethinking simply means that everyone questions everything to ensure that nothing limits any child or student from being prepared for what comes next. And we are committed to helping you do that in any way that we can. I recently released a framework to explain OSER's key priorities and values, to keep us focused within OSER's on those priorities and values, and to help us ensure that the work we do exemplifies these priorities and values. The framework communicates the way in which OSER's and our investments will focus our work. We will rethink how best to support states in the work that they're leading. We will provide states with flexibility within the constructs of the law in implementing their programs. And we will partner well with parents and families, individuals with disabilities, and diverse stakeholders, all with an intense focus on raising expectations and improving outcomes for children with disabilities. The framework that we released prioritizes rethinking all aspects of how we better serve infants and toddlers, children, youth, and adults with disabilities, which I believe includes how we better serve states to do the very work that you will be talking about today. Today's symposium is a part of our commitment to better support you in the work you're leading and should exemplify the key priorities and values that I mentioned earlier. So I hope that today's focus on supporting IEP teams and schools in identifying evidence-based practices designed to meet the individual needs of students, in developing and implementing high-quality IEPs, and in addressing the capacity needs of all those in the system who support the child or the student will add value to the work that you're leading and move us forward in our collective commitment to preparing each child or student for what comes next. So I hope you have a great day, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Johnny. As we transition to our invited speakers, I want to point out that we hope you come away from the symposium with a deepened understanding of several key points. Some of that understanding has to do with strategies for identifying evidence-based practices and aligning those to student needs, strategies for active use of the IEP to facilitate implementation of evidence-based practices, resources to support efforts to enhance high-quality implementations of IEPs, and the necessary system components to address the capacity needs of teachers, leaders, and support personnel in implementing high-quality IEPs. I will briefly introduce each speaker, but I encourage you to read their full biographies, which are available on the symposium page at OSEPideas.org. All the speakers are doing very fascinating work, and their remarks today will only give you a glimpse of their work and their achievements. Our first speaker is Kaylan Connally. Kaylan Connally currently serves as Program Manager, Student Expectations at the Council of Chief State School Officers, where she supports states' efforts to ensure that all students, and particularly students with disabilities, benefit from college and career-ready expectations. She works to support states as they strengthen their teacher and leader preparation programs for the success of each child. So with that, welcome, Kaylan.
Thank you for that introduction, and glad to be here today. As she mentioned, I serve at CCSSO, where I work to support states in their efforts to strengthen outcomes for students with disabilities, and as part of that work, manage CCSSO's partnership with the Cedar Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs, that works to strengthen teacher and leader preparation for the success of students with disabilities, and have been glad to partner with Cedar over the past 5 years, and grateful to continue that partnership and have the opportunity to be here today with my Cedar Center colleague, Erica McCray. I'm here today really to highlight the principal's key role in supporting IEP teams to develop and implement high-quality individualized education programs for students with disabilities, and in particular highlight the state's role in strengthening supports for school principals to do just that, to lead inclusive learning environments where each and every child, including students with IEPs, can truly thrive and achieve. In this session, I'll share a bit about CCSSO's strategic supports to states around inclusive principal leadership and ensuring high-quality IEP implementation for students with disabilities, as well as the development of CCSSO's guide supporting inclusive schools for the success of each child, a guide for states on principal leadership that was developed in partnership with the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership. And we'll share a little bit more about that diverse alliance of organizations. And I'll highlight in particular from that resource a few strategies that states can use to integrate inclusive principal leadership into both policy and practice to enhance high quality IEP implementation and improve outcomes for students with disabilities, along with some helpful resources aligned to those strategies. First, I wanted to provide an overview of where this work falls in CCSSO's 2017-2020 strategic plan. It's situated in Goal 1, which is really focused on students and ensuring both high expectations and appropriate supports and resources for each child. But we'll also note that it intersects with Goal 4 as well, focused on school and district leaders and strengthening supports for school principals to continuously improve schools. And specifically within that, if you could move forward one more slide. Thank you. Intersects with Strategy 1.2, which is focused on ensuring that each student benefits from college and career-ready expectations, with a particular focus on both students with disabilities and English learners. And as part of that, we have a body of work on ensuring that students with disabilities have access to both high expectations and appropriate supports and accommodations through their IEP. And that's really where this inclusive principal leadership work intersects and falls. And our theory of action is that if we convene state education agency teams to bolster local capacity to support inclusive principal leadership, then students not meeting grade level expectations, including those students identified with disabilities, will have access to an effective learning experience facilitated by the development of high quality IEPs. This inclusive leadership work is also grounded in states' commitments to equity that they made last year to ensure that every student has access to the right resources and educational rigor that they need at the right moment in their education, and regardless of background and circumstance. This Leading for Equity document really anchors our work that I mentioned earlier, that's grounded both in equity and in our strategic plan. Before I speak to where we are with this inclusive leadership work now, I wanted to speak a little bit about where we've been and the inclusive leadership work's development. In 2015, CCSSO worked, if you could advance one slide, worked collaboratively with other members of the National Policy Board for Educational Administration to release the professional standards for educational leaders that outline really the foundational principles for effective educational leadership. These standards refreshed the Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium standards and really emphasized the principal's role not only as building manager, but also as instructional leader. Effective principals are particularly important for the success of students with disabilities. And when principals hire, support, and retain great general and special educators and cultivate the conditions for teaching and learning that provide equitable opportunities, each and every child can succeed. And so in January of last year, CCSSO, in partnership with the Cedar Center, released a supplementary guidance document to the PSEL 2015. And this document here really identifies those aspects of the professional standards for educational leaders that are particularly important for ensuring that students not meeting grade level expectations, including identified students with disabilities, will have access to high quality IEPs, excellent teaching, and appropriate supports, as well as some concrete examples of what inclusive principal leadership looks like in practice. And I just want to highlight one example from the document aligned with the conversation today. There's an example included in this great resource. For years, students with IEPs at a large suburban high school were not permitted to take honors or AP courses. And this changed once a new principal opened these classes to all eligible students and provided the proper accommodations and supports so that students with disabilities could succeed. The principal also discovered that the College Board supports students with IEPs by providing accommodations not only for AP exams, but also for the SAT and ACT, and provided similar accommodations there. And this was just the beginning of a different approach by which the principal raised expectations by ensuring that all students had access to rigorous coursework and helped parents and students with IEPs learn how to advocate for the accommodations that they need to be successful. This document, again, was released early last year, and we didn't want to stop at the release of the document. And so shortly following, CCSSO held, in collaboration with the Cedar Center and the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, a collaborative meeting of 32 individuals representing OSERs, an OSEP, and OESE-funded TA centers, as well as national organizations, to discuss the critical role of school principals in supporting and strengthening outcomes for students with disabilities, really grounded in that foundational PSEL supplementary guidance document. Each organization at the meeting made specific commitments for how they will carry out inclusive and support states, districts, and schools in advancing inclusive principal leadership to help ensure that the implementation of high quality IEPs, from communicating and disseminating the resource to contributing to cross-organizational collaboration and strategic planning and resource alignment. And so, in order to sustain and build upon this collective work, CCSSO formalized that partnership and launched the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership to strengthen supports to states on advancing this work in policy and practice. In terms of where we are now, we just this past May, after a year of convening and working with the National Collaborative, released Supporting Inclusive Schools for the Success of Each Child, a microsite that provides 8 strategies and accompanying resources to support states in integrating inclusive principal leadership in policy and practice. These organizations, whose logos appeared on the previous slide, partnered to develop this great resource. And the 8 strategies that are up on the screen were identified by experts in the field of inclusive education and represent their collected knowledge on how to ensure that principals are prepared and supported to lead inclusive learning environments for students with disabilities and each and every child. Today, I'll just highlight 2 strategies and aligned resources that are included on that online guide. Listed here are suggested actions a state agency could take to transform principal preparation and licensure to really integrate inclusive principal leadership practice into policies related to preparation and licensure. So for instance, working with IEPs, states may establish and/or implement with fidelity principal preparation approval standards and policies that ensure that all new principals can lead inclusive learning environments within their schools. And listed here under strategy 4 on promoting principal development on inclusive practices are suggested actions a state education agency could take to effectively develop inclusive principal leadership among existing school leaders through in-service supports. So SEAs can provide, promote, and evaluate the efficacy of in-service support, evaluation, and ongoing professional learning opportunities for principals at both the state and the local level to ensure that inclusive principal leadership practices are incorporated and principals have the supports that they need to support IEP teams around the effective development and implementation of high-quality IEPs. In addition to the strategies, there are aligned resources on the online guide, which my colleagues will shortly talk about, including the course enhancement modules and innovation configuration on inclusive leadership from the Cedar Center, as well as high leverage practices in special education, and the IRIS Resource Center site, creating an inclusive school environment. And my colleagues will speak more about those shortly. In terms of where we're going next, CCSSO is committed to providing both short and longer term support focused on developing school principals who are well prepared and supported to lead inclusive learning environments that meet the needs of students with disabilities. We're launching the Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership, or AIPL, state initiative in partnership with the Cedar Center and the Oak Foundation that will support 5 states over the next 2 years and really going deep on inclusive principal leadership and building upon, deepening, and refining their current work on school leadership to have a greater focus on inclusive practice that promotes the development of high quality IEPs for students with disabilities. If you're interested in learning more or would like to be involved, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is listed up on the screen. And if you're just interested in exploring or are just now getting started in this work, encourage you all to visit that microsite, Supporting Inclusive Schools for the Success of Each Child, and in particular, the Where to Start a Reflection questions. They're a great way just to get started on the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylan. Our next speaker is a colleague of Kaylan's. It's Erica McCray. Erica McCray, PhD, is an associate professor of special education at the University of Florida. Currently, Dr. McCray is co-director for the Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform, otherwise known as the Cedar Center. And also, she has an OSEP leadership preparation grant, project studying teacher effectiveness, education, and policy, which goes by the acronym of STEEP. Welcome, Erica.
Thank you, Carmen. It's a pleasure to be here to represent the Cedar Center. I am on the leadership team with Dr. Mary Brownell, Lynn Holtheide, Meg Hammond, and Lindsay Hayes. I'm excited to talk to you today about resources that we have available on the Cedar Center website and on some of our partner websites to support the implementation of high quality IEPs using evidence-based and high leverage practices. So as I mentioned, I'll share some examples of how teachers and leaders can use high leverage practices and evidence-based practices to implement IEPs in inclusive settings. I'll highlight products for stakeholders to learn about inclusive principal leadership, which Kaylan Connally just mentioned some of those resources, high leverage practices, evidence-based practices, all towards the end of high quality IEP implementation. So the Cedar Center is a partnership between the University of Florida, the American Institutes for Research, and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Our charge is to create aligned professional learning systems that provide teachers and leaders effective opportunities to learn how to improve and support core and specialized instruction in inclusive settings that enable students with disabilities to achieve college and career-ready standards. The innovation configurations is one of those tools. If you haven't heard about an innovation configuration, it's essentially a structure for identifying strengths and gaps in professional learning opportunities in a specific content area or focus area to increase the use of evidence-based practices. The Cedar Center has a number of innovation configurations in various areas. For example, evidence-based practices for English language learners, principal leadership, supporting content for teaching students with disabilities using technology, a number of areas that have a range of evidence base behind them. We had writing teams during our first iteration of the Cedar Center starting back in 2014. review the available research on any of these areas that we felt would be important to providing high quality instruction for students with disabilities, and they synthesized that information in an innovation configuration format. From there, they developed rubrics, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those rubrics look like and how states have been using them. Here are a few of the priority areas that we found our teams really have used in developing programs and reviewing their programs. So you'll see innovation configurations for mathematics. We have reading K through 5 and 6 through 12. We have evidence-based practices for writing instruction. And then on the left side, you'll see some other areas that aren't exactly instructional focused, but they support high quality instruction, such as universal design for learning, culturally responsive teaching, and evidence-based practices for classroom and behavior management. Here's an example of what one of the IC rubrics looks like. As you can see, they are organized by a central component, which breaks down what the evidence-based practice should look like in practice. From there, a practitioner can look across the content provided in a course or in a professional development offering to see the level of evidence or the level of representation of that particular practice in the course or the professional development. So a level of 0 would suggest that that particular component is not evident. A level 1 would suggest that there's some evidence, but there could be some strengthening of the opportunity to learn it and practice it. And then level 2 and 3 get into deep opportunities to learn and practice in authentic settings for practitioners or pre-service practitioners. We found that our stakeholders, whether they were educator preparation providers or professional development providers at the state or district levels, wanted to improve their practice. They wanted to increase the representation when they were looking at the innovation configurations. But for a number of them, they didn't have time to go dig for the information to build those programs from scratch. So we decided as a center that course enhancement modules would be a good starting point for beefing up those instructional practices or those evidence-based practices. So this is an example of what one of our course enhancement module starting pages looks like. The disciplinary literacy sim provides an overview of what disciplinary literacy is, what standards, what instructional standards support the use of disciplinary literacy, and what it might look like in the various disciplines. From there, each one has a learning resources page. It has an anchor presentation that anyone can use in part or whole, so you should check those out. We also have professional development outlines. So it's almost like a course or professional development module in a box. It's a great starting point for going from the innovation configuration for reviewing how you're offering opportunities to practice evidence-based instruction to actually incorporating it in learning opportunities so that teachers and leaders have ready access to that information to improve instruction for their students. We've also gotten into exploring high leverage practices for students with disabilities. You might be familiar with the high leverage practices from Deborah Ball and her colleagues at Teaching Works at the University of Michigan. These are considered basic fundamentals of teaching. If a teacher can implement these high leverage practices, they have a good foundation from which to build on with evidence-based practices. Our team at the Cedar Center, in partnership with the Council for Exceptional Children and some other partnering organizations and researchers, identified high leverage practices for students with disabilities. This is not to suggest that they are only for special education teachers. They are for all teachers to support the needs of students with disabilities in their classrooms. If you'd like, you can go to highleveragepractices.org and download your own copy if you don't already have it. It's available for free download, or if you'd like to order a hard copy, you can order that through the Council for Exceptional Children. The high leverage practices are in 4 domains: assessment, collaboration, instruction, and social, emotional, and behavioral support. The 22 practices identified by our scholar team focus on instructional practice. They're practices that are used with high frequency by teachers of students with disabilities. They have research support to show that student engagement and learning does occur if these are used with fidelity. They're broadly applicable across content and settings, and skillful implementation is foundational to improving outcomes for students with disabilities.
In the following clip,
here are some examples
Ms.
of those in
Samuels
practice.
Is within the we do phase of explicit instruction. She is both modeling her thinking for solving a double-digit subtraction problem with regrouping, but also explicitly prompting her students to demonstrate their knowledge.
So what's this part that you're going to do first, boys and girls? Solve. What are you going to do first? Solve it. And then what are you going to do second?
Inverse operation.
And that's how you're going to check it. So my first step is to do what? Who remembers what's our little song? Tell us, remember, we're adding and subtracting double digits.
Addition.
Addition.
Or
And we're doing
subtraction.
double digit addition. Yes. Or subtraction. Start us off, London.
Split them two. Always start in the ones place two. Don't forget your sign too. That'll tell you what to do. If you're stuck, push through.
Awesome. So I line them up. I label them. I started my ones place do. Don't forget my what?
Sign.
Sign. What's my sign?
Minus.
Minus sign. Do I have more on the floor here?
Yes.
Yes. So I need to
Go next door.
go next door. I can't possibly do 1 take away 7. So I need to go next door and borrow a group of 10. So this 9 becomes an 8. I add my group of 10 over here. 1 plus 10 is 11. So I'm now looking at 11 minus what? 7. What is 11 minus 7?
4.
The answer is 4. What is 8 minus 2? 6. What's my answer?
64.
Can I get a quiet hand to go ahead and come up and show me the inverse?
2. Teachers should use a variety of strategies to ensure student engagement during lessons. Teachers have numerous opportunities within any lesson to promote student engagement. Providing multiple opportunities to respond to various prompts and questions is a terrific option for keeping students engaged. These opportunities to respond can be teacher or student-led. Teacher-led opportunities to respond can include oral questions, response cards, choral gestures, using technology such as clickers, and numerous other options. There is no optimal and scientifically agreed upon number of opportunities students should have to respond per minute to ensure success, but the number is higher than 0. Prompts to respond should cut across academic and behavioral domains. Student-led options can include students working in pairs or groups to further their learning. Including routines that promote collaborative learning not only keeps them engaged, but also creates a space where they take on the role of expert and have the opportunity to try out new skills and concepts with independence. Teachers can also leverage technology to promote engagement, whether that is having students use individual devices or whole group methods such as interactive whiteboards or other options that allow students to share and contribute skills and processes. This component is also key to several other HLPs, including HLP number 16, using explicit instruction, HLP number 17, use flexible groupings, and HLP number 19, use assistive and instructional technologies.
The High Leverage Practice video team was led by, or is being led by, Michael Kennedy at the University of Virginia. And we're grateful for his leadership, as these will be a great resource to support learning about and implementing high leverage practices, and can serve as a great way to start conversations and continue discussing implementation to support high quality IEP implementation.
Thank you, Erica. Next, we have Naomi Tyler. Naomi Tyler, PhD, is an associate professor of the practice in special education at Vanderbilt University's Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee, where she also directs the OSEP-funded IRIS Center. The IRIS Center produces engaging, interactive online resources to support the preparation of effective educators, giving them the knowledge and the skills to use evidence-based practices to improve outcomes for all children, but particularly struggling learners and these children with disabilities. Welcome, Naomi.
All right. Hello, everyone. For the folks in our audience, you should be looking at your screen and you can see that I'm going to be talking about online resources about EBPs and HLPs to support the implementation of IEPs. And yes, I did have a lot of fun putting that title together. Okay, so the reason that I'm here representing IRIS is because that's what we do. We develop free instructional resources about evidence-based practices, high leverage practices, and a lot of other topics that are important to you folks who are watching. So these resources, as you can see on the screen, we have a list of just some of the many resources we have available. And they were developed for use in pre-service preparation, professional development, independent learning, on a vast array of topics, everything from accommodations and assessment to learning strategies, mathematics, reading, school improvement, and secondary transition. Now, in the 13 minutes that I've got left, I'm obviously not going to be able to show you all of the resources that we have across all of the topics, but what I am going to do is going to be showing you some key tools on our website that can help you search for and sort based on important criteria to you to find the resources that will be the most helpful to you and to your school. So our signature resource is our IRIS STAR Legacy module. These are sort of self-paced, self-guided instructional units that are grounded in adult learning theory. They translate research to practice. And when we do that, we get to work with some of the top experts in the field. Very often, these are the same folks whose research helped to validate that practice in the first place. And the use of these modules in college courses has been proven through research to improve awareness and knowledge of students' understanding of these topics. So our team in Nashville, not only are they experts in translating research to practice, but they are also experts in instructional design. So as they develop these resources working through this 5-component cycle, they very carefully sequence and scaffold the information in the module. Information is presented in a variety of formats, whichever is the best way to get that information across. One of the great aspects of having online resources. So everything from text, videos, graphics, audio interviews. We have interactive applications. We summarize supporting research, but we also include all of the resources that we used in the development and the reference list, and also refer you on to additional websites, books, chapters that might provide you additional information should you want to dig deeper into those resources or that content topic. The modules are developed to be standalone resources, but they can also be used in conjunction with lots of other IRIS resources that we have on the same topic. And in fact, we have so many that we actually developed something called a wraparound content map that helps you identify supporting resources that can go into additional depth or breadth depending on what you're looking for. So those are just a few of the things that I'm going to be showing you or that you can access on our site. And in a second, we're going to actually go live. I'm hoping to go live, and we're going to explore our website. The IRIS Center is located at Peabody College at Vanderbilt University. So our URL is iris.peabody.vanderbilt.edu. But you can also find us by going to iriscenter.com or Googling IRIS Center, IRIS Modules, IRIS Peabody, IRIS Vanderbilt, and that will also get you there. Am I good? All right, so hopefully you are looking right now at the screen and can see the homepage of our website. You might want to just enlarge and go full screen so that you can see it a little better. All right, at the very top of our website, we've got several tabs. The first one, resources, is the one that I'm going to talk about first. I'm going to pause here for a moment. I'm not going to talk about everything under the resources tab, just a few, but I want you to see all the things that we have available. Everything under the resources section is free. There is no login, username, or password. Everything is accessible, 508 and WACG compliant on our website. So even though I'm only going to be talking about 2, I do want to note that we've got a lot of resources tied to evidence-based practices, films and children's books highlighting people with disabilities. There's a whole section for faculty, tips on how to use these resources in your college courses, how to align them across your course and your curriculum, sample syllabi, similar portions of our site for PD providers, independent learners, website navigation videos. So if what I'm doing right now is too fast, which I know it's going to be, you can go back and watch some of these videos at a slower pace. What I do want to highlight is our IRIS resource locator. This is a good place to start searching for resources on our site. And what this is, it's a search engine. It's also sort of a sorting tool for you to use as you're looking to find resources. So in this left navigation bar, you can see all of the topics that were listed earlier, if that's something you want to sort by. You can sort by the age groups that you're interested in, finding resources for, the type of resource, specific module elements, whether or not we have that resource translated into Spanish or not. In Kaylan's presentation, on one of her slides, she mentioned a module for school leaders. So I'm going to show you how the IRIS resource locator works real quickly. I'm going to click on school improvement. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up just the resources linking to school improvement. We have 88 of those. And if I click on modules, you can see that it also lists the type of resources we have. All of the different modules that we have available show up. And I'm going to scroll down. And this is the one mentioned in Kaylan's presentation, creating an inclusive school environment, a model for school leaders. So if you're a school principal or other type of school leader, that one might be helpful for you as you set up your school environment. Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to show you under the resources, and that then can help direct you to the actual instructional resources that we have. The second thing I want to show you is our high leverage practice alignment tool. And this is a tool we developed in collaboration with CEDAR. Erica talked a little bit about the high leverage practices, or HLPs. Similar to our IRIS resource locator, you can use the left navigation bar to sort by topics. There are 4 kind of domains that the HLPs fall under. The resource type, whether you're looking for a module or a case study, how closely aligned our IRIS resources are with that particular HLP, and whether the content in our IRIS resource explains implementation steps or whether it's just overall information. So IRIS, you may be asking, why would I want to find an IRIS resource that's only loosely aligned with an HLP? That doesn't seem like it would be very helpful. Excellent question. So I'm going to show you an example of what that might look like. If we go under the social, emotional, behavioral domain, we see that there are 4 HLPs there. Number 10 is conduct functional behavioral assessments. I'm going to click on that, and all the IRIS resources that align with that are listed. And as I scroll down, you can see that we've got one on defining behavior. Now, in order to measure and take data on a particular behavior, you have to define it first. But that's only a small component of conducting an FBA. So it's loosely aligned. But it would be helpful to you when you're conducting a functional behavioral assessment. If we scroll down further, we have another case study unit on measuring behavior. So we can see that this one's actually moderately aligned. It goes into a little more detail. And we have notes at the bottom, and this was developed by the team at CEDAR, that'll tell you exactly what that resource does and doesn't cover regarding that particular HLP. And then, of course, we have a module on functional behavioral assessment that is fully aligned, strongly aligned, that would give you everything you need to know regarding that HLP. Oops. So I'm going to scroll back up. Oops, I just, okay, just did something there that I shouldn't have done, I think. How do I get back to, sorry about that. Okay. So scrolling back up to the top, the resources tab is the first one that you should be exploring when you get a chance after the webinar. Now I'm going to go over to the PD options tab. This tab is a little different. Everything under the PD options tab was developed in response to consumer feedback. Unlike the resources tab, everything under the PD options tab, you are going to need to set up a user account for, and these are fee-based, and you'll see why in a minute. So one of the things that teachers wanted were certificates verifying that they had completed a module. So with the PD certificates for teachers set up an account, they take a pre-test, work through the same module that's available online for free, take a post-test, they get the certificate. The certificate looks like this, and it includes the module objectives, the number of professional development hours that we have assigned to it. IRIS is an approved online professional development provider in many states. So for example, on this certificate, you can see that we're approved in Texas and Massachusetts, and we include our license numbers on there. So that's an option for professional development for teachers. We have a school and district platform for school leaders. They were looking for something that allowed them to assign multiple modules to teachers, track teachers' progress, document completion for accountability purposes. So this is a demo of our school and district dashboard. You can see as a school leader that you can keep track of your teacher's progress. Similar to our other tools, you can search by module, by school, by role, by completion status. So just say I'm looking at how many teachers have completed. I can add learners if I want to. I can send an email to all the teachers that have completed saying, great job, keep up the good work. And then at the end of our professional development sessions, I can download all that information into a CSV file for reporting and accountability purposes later. So that's our school and district platform. Our third professional development option is our micro-credential stack. And if you think about our modules in terms of small discrete units of instructional study, micro-credentials are even smaller in bite size, and they're more intense in terms of professional development, and that the teachers are expected to apply the information from the micro-credentials. So, for example, we have a stack of 4 micro-credentials on the 4 types of accommodations that can be made for students with disabilities. So in these, teachers work through some information, they take baseline data on a student, pick one of the types of accommodations that they're going to use, take one of those, implement it, take data, analyze the data, submit teacher and student reflections. All of that is submitted through our partners at Digital Promise on their platform. It comes up to us in anonymous through an anonymous format, and one of our expert assessors evaluates it to determine whether or not the teacher showed sufficient application of that skill to earn a micro-credential. If they do, the teacher earns a digital badge. Depending on your state or district, you can then use that for everything from professional development credit to apply it towards recertification to salary bonuses or increases. So those are the 3 types of PD options that we have, in addition to, of course, our free options that are under the resources. So before I leave the site, I just wanted to highlight everything under the resources section, free, no username, password, completely accessible. Everything under the PD option site does require at least an account, if nothing else. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to stop sharing. Okay. All right. So I'm almost out of time, but I do want to highlight a few things very quickly for those of you that are familiar with IRIS. We do have some new things coming up that I do want to mention. So the first of those is a 3-part IEP series. 3-module series on IEPs. So the first one covers best practices in the development of high quality IEPs. The second one's a deeper dive into content related to NDRF. And the third one is essentials for school leaders. I mentioned earlier that we get to work with some of the top experts in the field. And for these, we're working with Mitchell Yell and David Bateman. If you go back to the first module or the first webinar in this IEP Symposium series, you will get to see the two of them and you'll realize how lucky we are that we get to work with them to develop this module series. We do have 2 new product lines coming out, Fundamental Skill Sheets and Iris Core Content Units. I don't have time to talk about them, but I do really want to encourage you to go to our homepage, sign up for our e-newsletter. When those come out, we'll send out an e-blast letting you know they're out, telling you a lot more about them, how you can best use them in your college courses or your professional development activities. All right.
Thank you, Naomi. Next, we have Gregory Fabiano. Gregory Fabiano, PhD, is a professor of counseling, school, and educational psychology in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Buffalo. His interests are in the area of evidence-based assessments and treatments for children with ADHD. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. About 20 years ago, we had a young boy referred to our center that was having a lot of school challenges. He was spending a lot of time in the principal's office because of misbehavior in the classroom, not really stuff that was malicious or aggressive, but disruptive. It was making it hard for the teacher to teach the class. He was also falling behind in his marks, not necessarily because of trouble with learning, but it was hard for him to sit and persist with a task for a long time where he really had to focus and pay attention. And on the recess field and in the lunchroom or cafeteria where there's less adult supervision, this young man was having some difficulties as well with getting along and sometimes being teased or teasing others. And in this case, we had a very good school leader who met with the parent who wanted to be a really good advocate for the child. The school psychologist got involved. The child went through the whole process and was determined to need an IEP. One was developed. It was a very elegant document with clear goals and objectives. And altogether, the team really rose to the challenge of helping this young man. But one net result was that at the end of that process, the child still ended up in the same classroom with the same teacher. They did receive some related services and some other supports, but it didn't necessarily change some of the day-to-day challenges the child was having. And our team has been trying to work to deal with connecting what's in the IEP to the daily practice that occurs in classrooms since that time. And I hope to share a little bit of that with you today and hope to have you walk away with some tools that you might be able to use even tomorrow. When I talk about ADHD, I'm just talking about kids that have developmentally inappropriate levels of either inattention, overactivity, impulsivity. So if we're talking about 4-year-olds, whether something's developmentally inappropriate in those domains is going to be different from a 10-year-old, and that's going to be different from an 18-year-old. And the symptoms in and of themselves are not necessarily quite as important as the second bullet point here, that these behaviors cause impairment in daily life functioning. How the child gets along with other kids, how they are able to understand and follow through with adult directions and rules and routines, how they function as a large group when perhaps the teacher is lecturing. And all of these things together, this impairment together, does have a pretty significant cost. And when we think about ADHD, that cost can be related to extra special education services or supports that are needed. ADHD is a little bit difficult to understand in the context of special education overall because there's no ADHD category. However, when we think about kids with ADHD, they are represented in the other health impairment category, the emotional disturbance category, and in the specific learning disability category, amongst others. Unfortunately, a recent review of the IEPs of kids with ADHD suggested that there are a lot of services and supports, many that are focused on academics, but not necessarily including best practice behavioral interventions that might help a teacher support a child in the day-to-day functioning in the classroom. Also important is that ADHD is not just a special education or a regular education problem. Children with ADHD spend a large part of their day in a regular education classroom, even if they are a student with an IEP. And so we have to think about how to support all the teachers and adults working with the child throughout the day. Furthermore, when we think about helping kids succeed in school, we now understand that we want to progress monitor frequently. We want to be able to tell where the child's at. We want to set some goals, and we want to make sure that they're leading up with their behaviors and the supports that they're receiving to address their behaviors to meet those goals. And so ADHD is represented at all tiers of a response to intervention framework, and all the individuals working with the child throughout the day are going to have to contribute to the feedback on how the child is performing. When we think about progress monitoring in schools, it may be too lengthy in terms of the lag between when a child's goal is established and when we evaluate whether that goal is met for a child with ADHD, because children with ADHD's behavior varies by day or perhaps by class or even by moment. And if our intervals of progress monitoring are weeks or months, that's not going to give us the sort of information we need to make good decisions on next steps to support the child. In fact, when we think about ADHD, a hallmark of the disorder is behavioral variability. So a parent might be really enthusiastic that Monday was a great day based on the teacher's report. Tuesday, the wheels came off and it was just not such a great day. Wednesday was so-so, and then Thursday and Friday were good days again. If we had a weekly assessment, it would be very hard to come up with a summary that would be accurate in terms of how well that child performed throughout the whole week, because it was up and down throughout that week. So when we think about good assessments and progress monitoring for kids with ADHD, they likely need to be daily, and they have to be individualized to the particular goals or behaviors that we're trying to support the child with in the classroom. So if we're in the business of really helping support kids, we want them to be successful in both their academics and their behavior in school. It's going to be very difficult to do that if we have to start from scratch. However, we can think of the individualized education program of a child with ADHD as a great start that we can then leverage to use as a way to take established goals and link them to daily behaviors in the classroom. And that's what I'm going to spend the majority of my time today talking about. I don't need to tell this group what an individualized education program is. I'll just call to the attention a couple of details that it is a list of measurable annual goals, and that there has to be an accounting mechanism that tells the parent and the teachers and the school leaders whether the child is meeting those annual goals or not. A best practice for a child with ADHD also is an operationalized list of target behaviors or goals. Daily report card has been around now for over 50 years, and a daily report card is elegant in its simplicity. It includes specific criteria that tells whether a goal is met or not. Needed no more than 3 reminders to start work on time, or had no instances of aggression during recess time. The daily report card provides immediate feedback to the child. So after a specific interval during the day, the child's given feedback. I'm proud of you. You did a really nice job getting all of your work done within the time that we gave the class. You met your goal for this class today. The daily report card is also a communication tool. So it goes home each day to the parent. So unlike what often happens for kids with challenging behaviors, where the parent just hears when things have gone wrong, I need to tell you that there was a problem in the hallway today, or you might not know this, but your child's very far behind on their homework, and we're going to need to send extra homework this weekend home with your child to get it done. Instead, a tool goes home each day to the parent that talks about successes. Your child met these goals throughout the day, and so it turns into a positive program and an opportunity to encourage kids towards continuing to meet goals. And then importantly, if it's just a piece of paper with goals on it that's providing feedback, that's probably good, but it's likely to be insufficient for a kid with behavioral challenges to motivate them to make the hard changes that are needed to make forward progress. So daily report cards also include home-based privileges, not big things that parents have to buy or create, really thinking about what are some things that the child gets for free right now that can be earned as privileges each evening, particular bedtime, access to screens or special toys or activities, or even parent time, which might be extra. It turns out to be a very valuable commodity in the eyes of the child that they will work for if they know that that's going to happen if they meet their goals during the day. So we did a study. We actually randomly assigned, we flipped a coin, and we assigned kids with ADHD who had an IEP to either special education as usual or a special education as usual. Plus, we worked with the teacher and the parent to set up a daily report card based on the child's individualized education program goals and objectives. And that was the only difference between the two groups. So all the other related services happened. The children went to the typical placements that they went to. And we had some measures of whether or not that worked or not. So we collected our measures at the beginning of the school year in October. And then at the end of the school year in May, we went back out and we assessed the child again to see how they were functioning. The results of our study did show that kids on observations of their behavior, they were improved. And I'll show you a slide in just a moment that shows they were markedly improved in their behavior when the daily report card was present relative to special education as usual. Teachers also rated the child as more likely to meet IEP goals and objectives at the end of the year if they had a daily report card in place throughout the entire school year. We didn't get significant effects on academic achievement, which we didn't expect because we didn't have an academic focused intervention. We're really focusing on a behavioral intervention. And I'll show you one result, which I think is compelling. This is the change score. This is the change in disruptive behavior from October to May for children who are in the special education as usual group. That's the blue bar. Versus children who had the behavioral consultation and a daily report card established to really monitor their IEP goals and objectives all throughout the day, every day. You'll see that children that had special education as usual were just as disruptive at the end of the year as they were at the beginning of the year. They didn't get worse, but they didn't necessarily get markedly better. The children that had the daily report card in place had 8 fewer rule violations observed during a half an hour observation on average at the end of the year relative to the beginning of the year. And you might say, okay, that's great, 8 fewer rule violations. But let's extrapolate that across a school day, right? If you help me out here with my mental math and I'm allowed to round up to 10, and we think about a typical school day has 6 hours in it, that's a lot, those many fewer rule violations within that school day. Now multiply it by 5 school days in a week, by 4 weeks in a month, versus 10 months in a school year. Imagine the successes that the child is having if they're not having all these rule violations and getting corrected and redirected or having demands and commands and reprimands thrown towards them. Imagine how much more motivated they might be to continue to make these positive gains and achievements going forward relative to a child that doesn't have that opportunity. So here's what we did. You can take a look at what's present in an IEP. There's operationally defined target behaviors. There's comprehensive lists of areas that need attention and support. There's procedures for monitoring progress. There's a way to provide feedback to the parent. Those are also components of a daily report card. Some IEPs will include mechanisms to provide feedback to the child or adolescent. Some may not. A daily report card is always going to include that. A daily report card is linked to positive consequences for goal attainment. Typically, we won't find that explicitly defined within an IEP. It also includes daily feedback on a daily report card. Some IEPs include daily feedback or even more frequent feedback, which is often quite helpful, but not always. Sometimes the latency to feedback is based on monthly or quarterly or yearly evaluations of whether goals were met. And importantly, both IEPs and daily report cards can be modified or adapted, and that's something that is really important to consider when you're working with kids with behavioral challenges, because oftentimes parents and teachers describe it like a game of whack-a-mole. You get one problem figured out, but another one might pop up. You need to have a fluid and easily adapted support system in place to be able to address those things as they happen so that you can put out small fires instead of big fires, which are often more difficult. So if you were to, here's what we did practically. We got a copy of the IEP. We sat down with the teacher, and there might be a goal in that IEP that says something like the child will continue to improve study skills and work habits. And there might be some additional language revolving around that. We said to the teacher, well, think about in your class tomorrow, how will we know if the child is working towards this IEP goal? And they might say, well, they would have to follow my directions through in center time with no more than 2 or 3 reminders, because that's something that's really hard for them, is to finish one task and then move to the next one and then complete it. We said, okay, how about we set a daily report card goal of following directions with 3 or fewer reminders? And then there might be something like we'll increase basic reading skills, Well, for many children with attention challenges, if they can't persist with the task and complete it, they're not going to gain from the academic instruction time that's present in many classrooms. And so we might have a goal of completing assignments with 80% accuracy within the time given. Here are some of the most common academic and social targets that were created in our study and our work. They are the usual suspects. If you sit down with an educator, I'm sure that this list would not be too surprising to them. Here's what a daily report card might look for a child. Going down the line, you might have some goals or targets for the child to meet. Then each class period, there's a way to evaluate yes or no, whether or not that goal was met. And at the end of the day, the teacher and the child can sit down and tally up how many yeses were earned out of all the possible yeses that were available. Now, here's a part that's really important, and this is something that I think school leaders and educators and parents have to get together and think about what's the best way to work to get this put together for kids. But this reward menu turns out to be what makes this daily report card important to the child. Here you can see the parents sat down, and for their child, they had some levels of rewards. So there's kind of a so-so day, 50 to 74% of yeses. For little kids, you can't use percent, of course. You might just say that equals 5 yeses during the day. Level 2 is a pretty good day, and so there's better rewards. And then you can see in level 1, that's an outstanding, exceptional day. That would earn this child a considerable amount of screen time on a weeknight. That would be a big time reward for that child. And this parent even got extra credit for having some weekly rewards listed down below. Here are a couple things to think about if you're trying to employ this in your own school or district. Academic goals usually need to be adjusted for daily evaluation. If you want a child to pass reading or math, you have to think about what the small steps are to get there on a daily basis. Our work showed that IEPs were really good at having academic goals and objectives listed in them, but that social goals were often not well represented within IEPs. And the teacher and the school counselor or school psychologist and sometimes the parent have to get together and think about, well, what else needs to go on this daily report card to address good performance on the part of this child? We also noted that goals and criteria have to be adjusted across the school year. One of the great things is when the child is successful, they're routinely meeting a goal. We congratulate them, and then there's often, everybody's got something to work on all the time. Then we would think about what might go next on the daily report card for the child to address. I guess in conclusion, I would say that the daily report card is an evidence-based intervention for ADHD. The IEP provides a really solid foundation upon which to develop and implement a daily report card in schools. And I guess the last thing I would point out is that sometimes there's an idea that we should do this weekly or monthly, but it is right in the name. It's a daily report card. It's very nice to give the child a clean slate every day, both if they had a great day the day before to continue to move forward, or if they had a challenging day, they get a clean slate and they get a new chance to work towards meeting those goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next, we have Stacy Skalski. Stacy Skalski, PhD, is the Director of Professional Policy and Practice for the National Association of School Psychologists. In this capacity, she works collaboratively with national and state leaders, education and mental health professionals, and public officials to advocate for the alignment of research, policy, and practice at the state and federal level. Her primary focus is on promoting high-quality educational practices and student services and comprehensive and coordinated school-based mental health services. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, and thanks to OSEP and Renee Bradley and everybody who's come before me for all the great information they've shared today. I'm here to really talk to you a little bit about specialized instructional support personnel, who they are and how they can be best involved in the IEP process. So when we put together IEPs, we're oftentimes thinking, who are the best people to be part of that? Parents are very instrumental in every aspect of the IEP and should be engaged really from the very beginning. Teachers are key partners in making sure that the IEPs are everything we want them to be. School administrators, making sure our principals are there and participating with the kids and helping us understand what the parameters are. And then really our specialized instructional support personnel are the ones who help us make sure that we utilize interventions and practices that will actually help improve the performance of youngsters. We do this in collaboration with our community providers, And we work together in all of these things with our kids to make sure that we're building IEPs that mean something special to them as well. So who are these specialized instructional support personnel? In IDEA, we refer to them as related service providers, or they would be the ones providing related services. And in ESSA, in the Every Student Succeeds Act, we refer to them as specialized instructional support providers. This is because we want to really make a note about the fact that the purpose of these services for these youngsters are to try and improve their performance in the classrooms and to help them be more successful. This includes people like occupational therapists, physical therapists, school counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, school social workers, sensory arts therapists like art, music, and dance therapists, and also our speech and language pathologists. It also includes the cadre of community providers that can be partnering in schools. So the psychologists and the social workers that might be working through community agencies or through school-based health clinics or full service schools to try and partner with these professionals to make sure that we're providing the greatest amount of services for youngsters to make sure that they'll be successful. So let's take a look at what some of these people do. Their key issues that they're trying to be involved in are prevention and intervention services, trying to make sure that we're addressing the barriers to learning and the things that keep kids from being successful in the classroom. We want to make sure that we're always in creating atmospheres, climates that are positive to learning and help engage students at all times, both academically and also social, emotionally, and behaviorally. We want to work with our teachers and our administrators, our parents, to make sure that we put all of this together to help kids be successful in the classroom. We're part of a critical member of the team that makes it possible for kids to be successful in schools. So let's take a moment and let's look at what one example might be of how school psychologists could be involved in the implementation of IEP. So we know that a good educational presentation must have a triangle included, and so I thought it was important to put one in. And so to that end, it's important to understand that a school psychologist or any other SISP that I'm talking about can be involved at any of the levels of intervention that happen with kids. We have the first tier where we're looking at sort of universal prevention and trying to make sure that we identify the kids who need our support, and then we put into place some prevention mechanisms so that we can try and help kids be successful in the classroom without having specialized instruction. And then we also can work at the secondary and the tertiary levels to target kids who actually need our direct interventions, as well as kids who might need more intensive therapeutic controls. So some of the things that school psychologists might be involved in are screening and problem-solving interventions. You heard Dr. Fabiano talk a little bit about that in his presentation. In this case, what might be happening is a school psychologist might be involved in reviewing school-wide systems data. They might be looking at the educational records of youngsters, participating on RTI problem-solving teams, and helping to make sure that we're utilizing screening tools to identify our kids who might be at risk for school failure. We're looking at social emotional screeners, the administrations of things like the YRBS. The school psychologists might actually take that data and look at it and help the principals understand where the pockets of needs might be in the school. They'll also look at school-wide data like academic data that's collected, statewide assessments, things like that. Always looking for which kids could potentially be struggling to stay successful in school, and then try and get those supports to them. Another thing that school psychologists might be involved in is the assessment and evaluation of kids. Now, this is probably the most familiar role for most people for school psychologists, but it's actually something that is critical when it comes to understanding really how we can be the most supportive for kids. It's really important for your school psychologist to be involved in your multi-tiered systems of supports as a key member of your problem-solving teams, looking at both the formal and the informal assessment data that might be available there. We want our school psychologists and our other SIS providers to actually get into the classrooms and actually do observations and meet with the teachers and talk to them about how the kids are being successful. We want them to be involved with family interviewing and thinking about functional behavioral assessments and how we might best build the types of behavioral supports for youngsters so that they can be successful. In all cases, we really want to think about how are these members collaborating with other key professionals in the school to make sure that we don't miss anything with kids, that we're always looking for what kinds of things can help a kid be more successful. A third piece that they might be involved in is then the selection and implementation of interventions. Many school psychologists and other specialized instructional support providers will provide direct instructions to kids, direct services, coaching, mentoring, helping kids be able to navigate the educational system more successfully. They will work to try and make sure that the evidence-based interventions that we are implementing are actually implemented with fidelity, so that we try and stay as close to possible to the standard protocols that are brought to us out of our university bases and try and put those into the classrooms in a way that are most successful for the kids. We want to make sure that when we're working in these settings, that we're doing everything we can to consult and to collaborate with the different players so that we're providing the best possible interventions for kids. Interventions that'll make a difference in how those children are doing. And in order to know how that is, we have to progress monitor. We have to make sure that we're looking at the data and how it tells us how a kid is performing in the classroom. So how is a school psychologist helping you gather that data? How are they helping you review that data on a regular basis, not just once a year at an annual review, but in an ongoing process where we look at the data and we ask ourselves, is the kid receiving meaningful benefit from this IEP? And how are we able to know that? What is the evidence that we have for that? So we're looking for the tools that are being used in progress monitoring to be faithful to the types of services and supports that we are trying to implement for the kids for them to be successful. A school psychologist, social workers, counselors, all of us will be involved in this type of work, each taking to it our unique perspectives and knowledge and skills. Another area that we're really looking at then is really taking that IEP and figuring out, how do we need to adjust this? How do we make sure that kids are moving towards proficiency? Are the SISPs involved in the different types of meaningful educational benefit evaluations that are going on as part of the IEP? Are we looking at the proficiency of students and asking ourselves, are the kids making progress? Are they actually improving in the classroom? Are they meeting their IEP goals and objectives? So we're looking specifically at those findings, and then we're working with the team to adjust the IEP to make sure that it's meaningful for the kids. In all cases, SISP can be involved in every aspect of the development of the IEP and the implementation of the IEP. And I encourage you to think about how you can tap into the valuable resources provided by these professionals.
Thank you, Stacy. Next, we have Donna Wilder. Donna Wilder, PhD, is the supervisor of professional learning in Prince William County Public Schools in Virginia. Following a 32-year career as a classroom educator, and that career spanned grades kindergarten through 12th, she was the professional development specialist for secondary mathematics. She currently supervises the instructional coaching program in Prince William County Public Schools, and she's also actively involved in the Teacher Induction Network. Welcome, Donna.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to spend a little time with you this afternoon as part of this wonderful learning opportunity. During this short time that we have this afternoon, I'm not here to tell you about what I think. Rather, I'm here to invite your thinking around critical areas that impact student learning and the learning of those teachers tasked to teach our students. The first critical area is around learning and planning. And this isn't just learning and planning for teachers. This is to establish a culture of professional learning and professional learning communities. When working with teams and individuals, how do you ensure that planning results in high quality instruction that is aligned to state curricula and informed by data specific to IEP goals and student learning needs? Too often our teachers gather together in teams without the presence of special educators. Yet we know that when teachers reduce isolation, come together to share their knowledge about students, about curriculum, about skills and best practices, they forge a partnership that is committed to student learning. And we know that it impacts our students in resulting in academic gains for all. In the context of the professional learning communities, in what ways might we better support our educators during their collaborative learning teams? And also, how might we advance this concept? How might we address the needs of our general education teachers, as well as our special educators, who sometimes meet each other on the first day of school, yet are supposed to go forward and have an impact on all learners? How might a professional learning community for these pairs of teachers and other teachers throughout a building address the needs of students, best practices, and grow a successful partnership between these educators that can truly impact student learning? We in Prince William County are very fortunate to be part of the Teacher Induction Network. This is sponsored by Apple Federal Credit Union Foundation. It is composed of 12 Northern Virginia school divisions, 3 universities, Learning Forward Virginia, and Arroyo Research Services. Apple Federal Credit Union has a commitment to student learning in our schools, and also to best practices and best instruction from our educators and retaining the teachers we hire. Too often, it is our newest educators who are challenged in classrooms where they must meet a wide range of needs of diverse learners. Often these learners are accompanied by IEPs and another educator who's now going to be part of the learning environment and the culture of that classroom. For these teachers, it starts at the beginning too. In your work with new educators, how do you support the mentorship and learning needs of novice educators in a safe, inclusive learning environment? And how do you support them as they learn to work in partnership with each other and make visible their commitment and belief that all students can and will learn? When we think about impacting learning, this is an area that is very close to me. If we use data combined with the 3 C's, coaching, collaborating, and consulting, in supporting our teachers and teams, we have the best opportunity to elevate thinking and impact practice to meet the needs of our learners. To impact, the most powerful way that we can support educators is by using the tools of the 3 C's and knowing when, why, and how to use each of these powerful tools to build self-directed learning in those we support and those who can apply their knowledge and thinking with self-driven motivation to do so. Unfortunately, as a society, we are not comfortable with silence. We want quick answers. And when answers don't surface, we either provide the answer ourselves or give advice about how someone might proceed to go forward. Yet we know that the best impact on others is that they find their way. They explore their own possibilities and solutions. In your work, what is your level of understanding of the 3 C's? And how skilled are you in knowing when, why, and how to use each of these tools to best support the learning of others? I offer a quote for you today. Go ahead and click. This is one that was very powerful to me a number of years ago as a professional learning specialist, often frustrated by delivering very lengthy, detailed, high-quality professional learning, only to find it was sitting in a folder on a shelf in the classrooms of teachers who had experienced the learning. Sir John Whitmore, who passed away just a couple of years ago, who has written several books around coaching for performance, says this: when we give our advice, we open the door to be blamed for failure. Blame evokes defensiveness. Defensiveness reduces awareness. No 2 human minds or bodies are the same. How can I tell you how to use yours best? Only you can discover how with your awareness. And it is through coaching that we elevate self-awareness in others to find their way and make decisions that are best for them. The next area is looking at inclusive practices. The first, aligning our instruction and assessment to the standards and needs of learners. Click. And to design lessons that incorporate resources and best practices that support consistent progress toward targeted goals. What evidence do you collect that shows that there is teaching inclusive of the diversity of students, that it enables all students to access course content, fully participate in learning activities, and ultimately demonstrate their knowledge during assessments? How inclusive are you in addressing the needs of not only students, but of the educators who teach them? And lastly, how inclusive are you, and what are your thoughts as we communicate progress to all stakeholders and modify support as needed? How do you and your organization support parents who may not possess the highest levels of education? How do you support them in becoming a contributor in the learning support needed by their child? What is your value of opportunities to meet with these parents beyond required IEP meetings? And how might such conferences prove to be an integral component of student learning? So as you think about student learning, and starting at the beginning, I leave you with this question. What are your most important beginnings for your students and your teachers? Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. All of our speakers have given us quite a bit to think about. So I would like to next introduce a video from Daniel Parker. Daniel Parker is the Assistant Director of Special Education at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. In this video, Daniel discusses Wisconsin's process for revising their IEP guidance. So I turn it over to Daniel.
Hi, my name is Daniel Parker. I'm an Assistant Director at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction on the Special Education team. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about One State's journey, Wisconsin, on our development and revision of our IEP guidance. So in Wisconsin, our IEP guidance is called College and Career Ready IEPs, Improving Outcomes for Students 3 through 21. And we developed our guidance. We really wanted to focus on an IEP discussion in an IEP meeting that resulted in improved outcomes for students, that focusing on students' unique disability-related needs, and ensuring that students are ready to graduate college and career ready and for living in the community. Our journey is all about alignment. When the Office of Special Education at the Department of Public Instruction asked states to focus on an improvement area as part of results-driven accountability, or RDA, in Wisconsin, we selected literacy and reading as an improvement outcome for our students with IEPs. In Wisconsin, our RDA effort is called Reading Drives Achievement, Success Through Literacy. In addition to our alignment of our IEP forms with our improvement strategy, we also wanted to align our guidance and forms with other initiatives happening in our department, namely our focus that every student graduate college and career ready, our state superintendent, Tony Evers' vision for all students in Wisconsin, as well as our strong focus on an equitable multi-level system of support and the resources we have put into supporting that work in Wisconsin, where equity is at the center of the key systems feature of an equitable multi-level systems of support, as well as our work in culturally responsive practices to support the unique needs of each student. When we think about what we want to accomplish with our IEP forms guidance, and when we were talking to stakeholders, we did acknowledge that when we solely focused on procedural compliance and how an IEP form was filled out, we didn't necessarily see the outcomes for students that we would have hoped. So as we revised our forms and our guidance around IEPs, we really wanted to promote discussions at IEP meetings that focus on student improved outcomes and outcomes around the reading and literacy. Our focus is also on what are the skills and supports needed for students to access, engage, and make progress in grade level standards, curriculum, and environment. So throughout the about 2 years as we were developing guidance on our forms, as well as our guidance on how to conduct IEP meetings, we engaged with multiple stakeholders. We worked with our Parent Training Information Center in Wisconsin and other family support agencies and organizations in Wisconsin. We worked with institutions of higher education, professional organizations that support educators. We held many focus group meetings with multiple stakeholders together at various points along the way to say, how are we doing? What are the areas that IEP teams need the most help with? What are the things that you think should be included in our guidance? And we've been constantly kind of been in a loop of getting feedback, revising, supporting, and going out and through statewide conferences and getting additional ideas to refine our work here. When we were meeting with stakeholders, some themes started to emerge. As we started to see patterns on what people were saying, we identified 5 core beliefs about college and career-ready IEP development. These beliefs include high expectations for each and every student, the importance of student relationships, culturally responsive practices, family and community engagement, and collective responsibility. As we were developing our guidance, we were really happy to see and encouraged by some of the guidance coming from the Department of Education. Some of you may remember a Dear Colleague letter that came out a while back. This is just a quick quote from the letter that states, ensuring that all children, including children with disabilities, are held to rigorous academic standards and high expectations is a shared responsibility for all of us. So that really supported our belief around collective responsibility. That letter also really supported the research and the concept of high expectations and the importance of alignment with grade level standards. So in addition to our CCRI-5 beliefs, we also knew that for educators and IEP teams, we needed a really clear and simple process of how to think about IEP development. And this became known as our CCRIP 5-step process. This 5-step process closely follows one of our sample IEP forms called our I-4 linking form. This linking form links together understanding students' achievement through present levels, the effects of disability and disability-related needs, IEP goal development, alignment of IEP services, and those analyzing progress, those measures for analyzing and reporting progress on IEP outcomes. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about all the steps, but I wanted to give you a little taste of each step and talk about some of the things that we incorporated at the department and through feedback from our stakeholders. And step 1, understanding achievement of grade level academic standards and functional expectations to identify strengths and needs. One of the things that we did is we aligned this step with some of the work happening in our department around development of grade band social and emotional competencies. So we encourage IEP teams to look at those social and emotional competencies throughout pre-kindergarten all the way through graduation, to think about what are the social emotional skills that students need to help them better access, engage, and make progress academically. This step also has a heavy focus on using current data, multiple data sources, objective data, and several other elements. In step 2, identifying how the student's disability affects academic achievement and functional performance. One of the things that we identified in terms of IEP discussions at an IEP team meeting is really encouraging a root cause analysis discussion of why is the student struggling with academic grade level standards or early childhood standards. Why is the student struggling with those early childhood or grade level functional expectations? So not just, what are we seeing with the student in terms of effective disability, but if we see a student is struggling with reading, why is that student struggling with reading? And drilling down, asking why multiple times so that we get at a root skill that if supported or taught will improve student outcomes in that area and overall help to close those achievement gaps that we may be seeing compared to grade level peers. In step 3, developing ambitious and achievable IEP goals, this step is really linking those IEP goals to disability-related needs. and making a clear connection between those two. In addition, we really found that we needed to help educators focus on the importance and requirement to align baseline, level attainment, and procedures to monitor IEP progress. So we are finding in Wisconsin that that's an area that we actually need to do some additional support, and we're going to develop a dig deeper module specifically on the ongoing progress monitoring, in addition to that regular reporting and interim reporting. In step 4, aligning specially designed instruction services such as accommodations, related services, and other supplementary aids and services and supports for the student. This step is all about, again, alignment between those services, the IEP goals, and those IEP goals addressing disability-related needs. Again, linking those things together. We went so far in our IEP forms to actually have IEP teams number the disability-related needs that they identify for each student, so that later on when they develop goals, each goal is supporting an identified numbered need, and each service is linked to the goal, which is linked to the identified disability-related need. So again, kind of really pulling together that whole process to make sure that we're focusing on everything around student outcomes. Step 5 is all about analyzing progress. As I mentioned earlier, we're really going to do a dig deeper module around progress monitoring IEP goals, because we know that the field needs additional guidance and support in that area and what that looks like. So I just want to thank you today. I want to thank everyone in Wisconsin, our discretionary grant partners, all of the staff at DPI, our stakeholders, our family support organizations, for continuously providing us ideas, our special education directors, our teachers, on how we can better support our guidance as well as our forms that will really help improve student outcomes. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about Wisconsin's journey.
Welcome back. And now we're in the question and answer portion of our time together. And so our first question is addressed to Naomi. Does IRIS have any resources that align with CEDAR's innovation configuration?
Actually, we do. And you can find it in several places. We actually have a document that lists all of the CEDAR innovation configurations and then the IRIS modules and case studies that align with it. And it's posted in several places. It's posted in the resources section of this webinar under the evidence-based practices and high leverage practices heading, so you can find it there. And it's also posted on our website. We have all the CEDAR innovation configuration or links to them, and then that's posted on our website as well. On our website, we also have alignments with all of the different state SIMRs. So if you're interested in looking at that from your state and what resources we have that align with that, you can go there as well.
Terrific. And the next question is for Kaylan. How have you engaged with states around the inclusive principal leadership online resources? And what about principals themselves? Have you also engaged with them?
Yes, so we have hosted several webinars to engage with states on the resource supporting inclusive schools for the success of each child, which brought state directors across special education, talent, and educator effectiveness, as well as school improvement. So that was one opportunity to engage with states. Also, through our partnership with the CEDAR Center, we are leading an affinity group on inclusive principal leadership, which brings together states that are just interested in learning more and exploring the topic on inclusive principal leadership via some of the exploration or where to start questions in the online guide. And we've also, over the past couple of months, been engaging in phone calls with state education agency leaders across those key divisions, special education, talent, or educator effectiveness and school improvement, along with state deputies to gauge states' interest and readiness to really commit to taking action around inclusive principal leadership at a higher level of capacity and engagement. And so we are really excited to be launching the Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership State Initiative, which will provide 5 states with deeper dive support around the topic over the next 2 years.
Thank you.
And then for the principals piece, we are really excited to partner with NASP, the National Association for Secondary School Principals, to host a webinar next week, October 24th. And while our primary audience at CCSSO are state chiefs and their SEA staff, we recognize the critical importance of ensuring that the resources that we release reach principals themselves, since that's the audience we're ultimately aiming to support in supporting states around inclusive leadership.
Terrific. So the next question is for Donna. What are your thoughts about how schools can develop successful professional learning communities specific to the general educator and the special educators who are assigned to the general educators to partner in classrooms each year?
So that's a question that I feel like some experience I've had over these last 3 years in supervising instructional coaches in a new program within our division has given me great insights about what we do when we see a need where we can put special educators and gen ed teachers together so that they actually have an optimal learning environment to explore some of the challenges that we know they face in their classrooms. What it takes is goal setting in the beginning and really establishing a logic model. What do you want to see a great partnership look like and sound like? So we know where we're going, and then we look at the different components that we would put in to support that. Because ultimately, if we just put teachers together, we all know we default to the place of least resistance. And when we do that, we don't offer the best quality instruction. We don't have the best partnerships. So the key to that would be having someone who would be a coach of these groups, who could identify those areas that maybe we're avoiding. Maybe we just look at the surface level of a situation that we need to do a deep dive. And that's where a skilled professional can come in as a coach and pose those questions that take teachers to an area of practice that really allows them to grow, and not just individually, but grow together and have a unifying vision of how we actually work together and what two teachers in a classroom are capable of doing when it works well.
That's exciting. So the next question is for Stacy. How do I'm assuming this is someone in the state, best include my SISP if he or she isn't in my building full time?
So it's a realistic possibility
Right.
that that's the case. A lot of times specialized instructional support professionals are part-time in different buildings. In a perfect world, we'd be full-time everywhere. Of course, that'd be with unlimited resources also. So it's one of the most important things to do is to make sure that you have collaborative teaming time in the schedule as a regular meet. Whether you can do it on a weekly basis, that would be ideal, at minimum, or a bi-weekly basis, making sure that the team members can come together and share their expertise and talk about kids in the most comprehensive way is really critical. Secondly, it's important to remember that when the IEP formal process is scheduled, when the meetings are going to be scheduled, it's really important to make sure that you have the key people there. So scheduling is really important. Checking with them, making sure that they're going to be able to attend in person. And at minimum, if they're not able to attend in person, we know a lot of times in rural settings, for example, it's very difficult for people because of the travel times between schools. Utilizing platforms that allow people to participate virtually. Zoom or GoToMeeting, things like that, they can actually allow that type of video conferencing to take place. And then thirdly, I think even if you're not able to meet face-to-face, having that scheduled time using a virtual platform is now more accessible to us than ever. And so the idea that we're not fully communicating and fully discussing kids, I think is a time of the past. Now we have so many mechanisms by which we can do that. It's important to take advantage of the knowledge and the resources that people bring to the table by making sure we engage them in all things when it comes to a youngster.
Right. I see some themes already about teaming and about intentionality.
Yes.
That goes through all your presentations. So Greg, the next question is for you. What are some challenges and what are facilitators doing to ensure regular progress monitoring?
That's a great question. there are few interventions that can last for a day and fix all the problems. Most of the things we're trying to tackle are going to take long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would echo the point about getting everybody on the same page and teaming. In fact, at the end of the meeting, we actually concretely say who is in charge of marking this down each day, who is in charge of collating the information, who's in charge of graphing it out so we can look at it, and what's the date we're going to get together and evaluate our progress and determine if we should continue because it's working or if we need to make changes. And we establish that date and try to stick to it so that everybody's accountable to the child and to their role in supporting the child.
Wonderful. So the next question is again to Kaylan. Do the professional standards for educators replace the ISSLC standards?
Yes. So the professional standards for educational leaders 2015 updated and refreshed the Interstate School Leader Licensure Consortium standards, also known as ISLIC in the community. So the new-ish professional standards for educational leaders 2015 really focus on the school principal's role, not only as building manager, but also as instructional leader.
Great. And thank you for clarifying the acronyms. The questions were really quickly and all I got was acronyms. So for Stacy, how do we know what special contributions SSISP member can make to the IEP process?
So it's really important to take the time with each of the professionals that are available to support kids to get to know exactly what their specific knowledge and skills are that they bring to the table. In many cases, the background that people have, the places that they've worked, the training that they've had will allow them to engage with kids in very special ways. And so you have to know what those particular talents are. You can do that through interviewing them. You can do that through surveying. You can have a person do a little professional presentations on their teams so that people can kind of understand. But I think it's important to sort of have a foundational basis for that, not just for your system, but for all your professionals. They're in the building so that you can know how to tap into the resources that you have. And then bringing those people forward as you work with kids in the collaborative process, saying, how can you contribute? What can you do to contribute? In what ways do you understand this youngster the best, do you think? What do you think you can do to contribute to their interventions? And then really building the structures and the supports for the kids based on the expertise that you have available, I think is critical.
Wonderful. So in relation to that, the next question is for Greg, and it has to do with parents. What are some suggestions you have for involving parents in the IEP goal development?
I'm an optimist. I don't think I've ever met a parent that said, I want my child to fail at school or to have problems with getting along with others or not mind the teacher. Parents want their child to succeed. And I think sometimes the process unfolds where the child's been having challenges for such a long time, everybody's at their wit's end, and it becomes a lot of admiring the problem. I think that's a mistake. I think that if we approach parents as partners and experts on the child we're working with, who could be a better expert, and say, we're going to need you as part of the team to help your child be more successful at school, establish positive goals, and then give them feedback, positive feedback on meeting goals regularly throughout the process. You've now gotten the parent as somebody that's aligned with your role as a school leader, school psychologist, or an educator, and hopefully someone that then carries that torch to the next year with a new teacher in a new classroom, and it really feels good about what the school's doing.
Right. I think that's really important to have that kind of positive interaction with everyone, with educators, with themselves, and also with their families. So next question is for Erica. What are the resources are available for learning and implementing high leverage practices?
We have a number of resources, and we're adding every day. On the highleveragepractices.org website, we have videos. We showed a couple of those during the presentation. We are building that library. We'll have videos for every one of the 22 high leverage practices. There's also a companion book that was developed to go beyond the initial introduction of the high leverage practices. It's called High Leverage Practices in Inclusive Schools. And it goes through each high leverage practice, provides examples, provides resources and tools that a teacher or leader could use to support learning and implementation of those. On the cedar.org website, we also have an additional set of webinars that have been facilitated. We're really at an exciting turning point in our work with states where they're starting to develop their own resources and do their own implementation and scale up. So we have some of those available. And one thing that I think cuts across some of our pieces is the crosswalk. We developed a crosswalk that aligns the teaching works, high leverage practices, the high leverage practices for students with disabilities, and the PSEL standards and the support for students with disabilities. And one other one I'll mention is a brief we put together to support the companionship of evidence-based practices and high leverage practices, because we found a lot of the educators we were working with understood what the practices should look like, but what are we talking about when we're talking about evidence-based practices, and how does that align with or support high leverage practices? So we have a resource for that as well.
Wow. We have to check out your website, don't we?
Please do.
So Naomi, what kinds of support have you seen districts and schools provide practitioners who have completed the IRIS modules?
So, wow, we've seen a lot of some really wonderful work going on in the districts. So starting from new teacher support, we see a lot of districts that use the modules as sort of new teacher induction, where they work through the modules, sometimes in small groups, and then they follow up with mentoring. And they're a lot of times aligned with the behavior series, because that's a big challenge for new teachers. So helping them get their classroom management under control, things like that. We've seen schools that select particular modules, and then the entire group goes through them, and then there's follow-up with coaching, looking at fidelity of implementation, things like that. We've seen districts pick specific modules, for example, for transition specialists, and then focus on that and follow up as well, looking at changes in everything from transition plans and IEPs to the practices that they're using in their classrooms to promote the transition. So lots of different ways that we see them doing that, but we always encourage follow up with, coaches, mentors, your teachers, things like that.
Terrific. So Greg, the next question is for you. How often should progress and IEP goals be monitored?
That's a loaded question because it's going to depend on what you're trying to assess or evaluate. If it's a behavior that occurs infrequently, but maybe it's a high intensity behavior like aggression, you might want to have some sort of weekly accounting of how often the child is sent to the disciplinarian or the school principal. If it's a high frequency behavior like interrupting or something like that, then you might have to be evaluating hour by hour or class by class. And so I guess maybe the moral of the story is whomever's creating the goal has to be very thoughtful about what's the appropriate time period for evaluating whether the child is meeting this goal or not. And that it might vary based on the goals that you're evaluating over time.
It's individualizing the goals and the measurables themselves. Yeah. Donna, this question is for you. You emphasize the importance of developing knowledge of the 3 C's. Can you give us an example of how these 3 tools might be used to build capacity during the reflective conversation with an educator?
Sure. Actually, before I came here today, I debriefed with a brand new educator that I observed yesterday. So I have some really firsthand and fresh information around that. As I worked with this new educator, she expressed that thinking about her lesson, she was concerned because she essentially is having no wait time. She asks a question and there is no time, which we know is probably one of the most culturally sensitive and probably most overlooked tools that there is in a classroom. So she said, I just really struggle with that. My students just spout out and then it doesn't allow anybody to think. So, I'm coaching her, I'm allowing her to reflect. So I said, so you'd be interested in really exploring some strategies that might take your voice and theirs out and give other students an opportunity to think and process. And she said, absolutely. So now I've been coaching, but now I know it's time for me to consult. But I consult in a way that still is going to honor her thinking and her practice ultimately. So what I did was I said to her, so might I offer you some strategies that I've seen in other classrooms that have been particularly impactful on giving students a signal to stop talking, to think and process before we allow students to think out. So as I offered those to her, she thought about them, she was nodding, and then at the end, I turned it back to her and I said, knowing what you know about your students, which of these might be most promising in your classroom? So again, she had the ownership over the decision. And as a matter of fact, her idea was, I'm going to put this in play when my students come back from specials. At the end, in talking about planning, one of the questions she said is, I just really wish I had an opportunity to go through my curriculum a little better and kind of think through it. Bingo. An opportunity for me to say, well, how about we look at the curriculum document and together we'll explore some of the possibilities for planning. So we navigate from coaching and really honoring the fact that the answer's in the room, and it usually resides with the teacher, whether they know they have answers or not. But if they don't, then we offer them either knowledge of research, another program that we're familiar with, or strategies. And you would never hear me say, you want to hear some strategies I used to use? No, I take myself completely out of it. So it is really honoring the thinking of that other person. And as a result, leaving her motivated to forge forward and navigate some of the challenges that she expressed early on.
Well, thank you. So we're doing this awkward dance here, so I'm in the camera range. Further? Okay, one more time. Okay, here we go. Hi, everyone. I was just a disembodied voice for a short time there. Many thanks to all our speakers today. This was really wonderful. We hope that you, as the audience out there, have increased your understanding of the wide arrays of effective strategies that can support and enhance implementation of high-quality IEPs. I also want to thank all of you who submitted questions today. If your question was not answered by our wonderful panelists, we will add it to the collaboration space for the symposia, and then you can check back and see how that was answered. Please learn how to log into the collaboration space to add your questions to the discussion. Again, many thanks to our wonderful panel, to Assistant Secretary Collett, our friends in Wisconsin who participated remotely, and to you all. Have a wonderful week.